Servus and welcome to another episode of the Pro Hockey Pod, episode 45. We got a nice home stretch going on right now. So as you guys notice, I'm back to the first format here, the little Zoom session. This week we got a guy on who I only was able to play 2 weeks with, but got to know him pretty well. Followed his career ever since knowing him there that year in Deggendorf. And, this guy's been a journeyman, just loves the game of hockey, been through Europe and lots of places. And, for all you young listeners out there, I think this would be a great guy to kind of listen to and kind of take some advice from him. But welcome to the podcast, Kyle Gibbons.
Hey, how's it going? Nice. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, I'm excited. It's my first podcast. I feel like in 2024, if you're not on a podcast, you're just kind of like, oh, who are you? So it's cool to be on one. I'm excited to share my story and have a chat.
Yeah, it'll be good. And yeah, I appreciate you taking the time coming on this one. And yeah, as you said, it seems like everybody today has some sort of podcast or a couple they listen
Yeah.
to. So it's good to get with the times. But you were born in Westlake, Ohio there. You mentioned it was a suburb there in Ohio. But what's the earliest childhood memory you have?
Oh man. Yeah, so Cleveland's not, it's a suburb of Cleveland. It's not really like a big hockey area, I suppose. But for me as a kid, I think it was going to back in the day, the IHL, and that might be new for some of your listeners. It was kind of like the AHL now. They had a team in Cleveland, the Cleveland Lumberjacks, and I used to love when they did the starting lineups and stuff. And I'd be in the stands with my parents, and the announcer would say all the guys' names, and I'd mimic the announcer in the stands. And but just going to those games as a kid was a lot of fun. And I think waking up at, I don't know, maybe 5 o'clock for house hockey, we called it in the United States. So you just kind of like Saturday mornings, Sunday mornings, you get together with maybe, I don't know, 20, 30 kids, and gets put on a different team every weekend, and you play for, I don't know, an hour or something, cross ice kind of game. And yeah, you get to play every position. And my parents have a picture of me playing goalie on their mantle back home, and I think that's probably the first and last time I played goalie. But it's pretty fun. I mean, those are probably some two memories that stick out the most for me growing up as a kid, for sure.
I remember the Cleveland team, but obviously I remember them more as the Barons. I don't know
Yeah,
when they changed their name there, but that's funny, the Lumberjacks. But
yeah, that was, oh man. So they were the Barons like a long, long time ago, like in like the 60s or something. I don't know, 50s maybe. Then we didn't have a team for a while, I guess. And then they came back as the Lumberjacks. Then they left for a year or two, and then they've been the Barons. Then they were San Jose's AHL club, the Cleveland Barons, for a few years. And then they rebranded to the Monsters, which is what they are now. And they worked with a couple different NHL teams. I think Colorado was a big one. They were with Colorado for a few years. And then I think they're with Columbus now, which frankly makes the most sense. It's a mile drive from Cleveland to Columbus. So those guys that are getting called up, it's a little bit easier for them to make the trip.
it's funny how it took like 20 years for all these like NHL teams to like figure out what makes most sense for the minor league teams. Like
Yeah,
I remember some of them, it was like at one point, like Toronto's was in St. John. Like some of the West guys were saying, oh, I remember like Arizona's was in Portland, Maine. Like
right,
not
right.
the easiest
Yeah,
travel
well,
either.
the first year they were the Barons again. They were the San Jose's affiliate. So the Worcester Sharks moved from Worcester to Cleveland. So before, imagine being in Worcester, which is like out by Boston, right across the area, and your NHL teams in San Jose. It's on literally the other coast. Like,
Hmm.
it just never made sense. But yeah, I think now they're, well, the whole addition of that California division in the AHL, I think finally makes sense. There's a team in Palm Springs and all that stuff now. So it's it does make a lot more sense to have those guys closer. But I don't know, maybe there's not enough hockey areas for, I don't know, man. I have no idea, but you're right. It does make a lot more sense now than it did before. That's for sure.
The people that make those decisions are above you and I's pay grade. So,
Yeah,
um, but
yeah,
kind of back to your
for
career there. So,
sure.
like starting out like minor hockey, as you mentioned, like those 5 a.m. early mornings, but then you ended up, I believe you played for the Cleveland Barons, like
Yeah,
youth
yeah,
youth program there.
right.
You guys all the way up. So
Yeah.
how was like your structure of like leagues? Like, did you have like, a league, kind of in your area there and then you do tournaments and stuff, or did you just mostly travel? Because obviously, it's a little differently set up in the States than it is in Canada.
Yeah, so I think typically in the States, like you have your little area, right? Some areas have more teams and others. Like obviously, like Cleveland, we had one team. I mean, there were some other AAA teams you could say in the area, but the one you wanted to be on was the Barons. I played there from when I was like 10. I think my first year of squirt. So I don't know how old you are, like Adam. What is that, like 10 years old maybe? And then I played there all the way till U18. I played 2 years of U18, so I played 8, 9 years there. Um, but yeah, so we were in like they called it the MWEHL, which when I first started had the Cleveland Barons, the Pittsburgh Hornets, and then all the Detroit teams. So like Bell Tire, Little Caesars, CompuWare, Honey Baked, um, Victory Honda, they're called now, but they were called Michigan Ice Dogs before. Um, yeah, so we played against them, and we were okay. We weren't lighting the league up, but um, there were some really good Detroit teams. And then as I got older, the league kind of expanded a little bit. So typically we would just weekend series. We'd go up to Detroit. We'd play 2 games against Honey Baked, and then the next weekend, I don't know, Bell Tire would come to Cleveland and play 2 games. So for the most part, it was just a weekend series with a few tournaments up in Canada sprinkled in, or maybe one in Chicago or Pittsburgh or something like that. But um, by the time I was at U18, though, they had expanded the league pretty far to where there was like a whole Pacific division that had like, oh, excuse me, the LA Junior or no, yeah, the LA Junior Kings, team out of Arizona called PF Changs. Um, there was a couple teams in Colorado, a team in Russell Stover. I think it was in Missouri somewhere. The junior St. Louis Blues were in the league. Then you had Chicago teams like Chicago Young Americans, Team Illinois, the Mission, and then Youngstown actually added into the league as well as a AAA program. And then there was always the Pittsburgh Hornets were always like the big rival, I guess, for us. And then it just kind of became like you played a showcase. The 5 teams in Michigan would come and play the 5 teams in our division, and whether that was in Pittsburgh or Cleveland or St. Louis, we would kind of play showcase tournaments. So it's a tournament, but you just play everyone once, and that's kind of how it worked out. And then you would play your own like little 5 team division. I think 2 home and 2 away. That was kind of the structure of the league. Because by the time I think you get to U16, because there's mixed birth years, there's no more tournaments in Canada for us. I think because there's mixed birth year, I guess,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
a lot of the kids in Canada, if they're good players, they try to take that step to the OHL or the WHL. But yeah, so most of it kind of was just like showcases. By the time he turned like 14, 15, the league was a little bit bigger. There was some more teams, and kind of just became, you played your little five team division, 2 home, 2 away, and then you played you know a showcase or 2 showcases against each division, and
Hmm.
that was your season. It was probably around well, I don't know, maybe 50, 60 games, but maybe you play some other teams in between. If you have an off weekend, maybe you play, I don't know, some team out east that you might see at nationals, or, maybe take a trip to Shattuck or something. We never did it that, but I'm sure there were some teams that did. But yeah, I think now it's pretty much strictly showcases because there's a whole. I still go back in the summer there. That's where I train and do all my summer stuff. And I chat with a lot of the kids and coaches that are around Cleveland that are playing at that level still. And yeah, I think it's basically just a showcase almost every weekend, whether it's out in like Philly or LA, or yeah, it's kind of interesting because I think the Detroit teams aren't even in the same league as the Barons now. It's, yeah, I don't know, man. It's hard to keep up with. There's so many new junior leagues, and yeah, I don't know. Hang on, I'm just gonna turn my lights on. It's getting a little dark.
Yeah, yeah, no
Okay,
worries. I
yeah,
was about to
sorry.
say that. It's getting a little dark in there.
Yeah. All right, that's probably a little
That's a little
better.
better.
Yeah,
You brought
sorry.
up something which I thought was cool though. You kind of brought up the difference in Canada where they at, around the 16 age they start, their focus starts going to major junior, whether it's the OHL or WHL or whatever. And I was curious,
Right.
like being an American like yourself, like did you ever have interest in that side of the road, or was it always like I want to, get a scholarship somewhere and go that route?
Yeah, that's a really good question because I think just in a non like in a non like descript way, you're just kind of pushed to college as a US kid. Not because someone's telling you to go to college. It's just, I think when you turn like 14, 15 years old, that's kind of when people are saying like, oh, okay, you could, you got potential here. And it's just always the conversation always centers around, oh, hey, like you could be a college player. You could, so you're kind of conditioned unknowingly, and not that the people are like pushing it on you. It's just that's what people know in the US is college. So the coaches and stuff. I mean, now I would say in today's game, it's a lot different for a 15, 16-year old than it was when I was playing 15 years ago, 16 years ago at that age. I think like without knowing they're doing it, they kind of just say, oh, yeah, you could be a college player. You could be a college player. And then, I remember when I was little, there was a NA team in Cleveland, a junior A team. They played in the North American League, and my parents, we were a billet family. We always had a couple guys live with us, and all they talked about was going to college as well. So for me, it was a little different. I was always kind of pushed to college, and my parents wanted me to go to college, and that was fine. I was okay with that as well, but I did have some interest from a few OHL clubs, and yeah, it's a little different because I don't think the OHL scouts at the time were really around a lot of the US kids. Maybe in Michigan they were, but I don't think I personally didn't encounter a lot of them and stuff. So I think for a while you just kind of get pushed into a bubble of thinking about college, and that's kind of your only thought. No one really talks about the OHL or the CHL in general. Um, but I played for my coach my U18 season, my U18 seasons. His name was Mark Fritchie. He was a very good coach for me. He talked me a lot. He showed me a lot of things that have been very useful in my game. And his nephew played. His name's Danny Fritchie. He played for London. When they had those loaded teams,
Yeah, I
and
remember him. That's what I was gonna say. I wondered if they were related.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, that Fritchie family is pretty big. I think there's like, I don't know. And anyway, there's I think three brothers that all have uncles and nephews and whatever. But anyway, so that was his nephew, I believe. I believe it was his nephew. I could be mistaken, or second cousin, maybe. I don't know, but maybe cousin. I think cousin actually, but I don't know. Doesn't matter. But he played in Sarnia and then got traded to London. And I had some talks with Mark, my coach. They said, hey, some OHL teams are interested in you. Like, what are you thinking? And at the time, I was like, well, I don't know anything about the OHL. The teams that were calling me were the one that I remember the most was St. Mike's. And they were just like, yeah, we want to bring you in, and we're thinking of drafting you, and all this stuff. Like, what's your take on it? And I think I was 17, maybe turning 18 that season. And I was like, well, I don't know anything about it. Like, how does it affect? And at the time, it affected your college eligibility, how long you were there. And there are all these rules that I don't think apply anymore. I could be wrong. I don't really know, but um, yeah, so I didn't want to jeopardize my ability to go to college, but I also was really interested in what this team had to say. And obviously, at the end of the day, I went to college, but yeah, I kind of was upfront with them. I was like, look, I don't know anything about the OHL. I don't know anything about St. Mike's. They sent me like a whole thing, like a whole recruiting pack, basically, of you know where I would go to school, where I could live, like what the daily routine was like, you know, everything under the sun. And I thought it was pretty cool. And then, a couple weeks later, I started getting some stuff from colleges that was like the same. And I was like, all right, well, this is kind of cool as well. So then, yeah, I just kind of thought like, you know what, I'm probably better off going to college just because that's what I've known, or that's what I've always wanted to do. And um, I like I said before, I don't think at the time coaches really knew that they were kind of pushing you to college, but I think it depends on the player, really, as
It
to
depends where
the
you grow up too, I will say. Because like for us, like in
yeah, I
Canada,
agree.
like we're pushed, not pushed, but like we're influenced a lot by the OHL because there's so many teams around. You go watch them live.
Right.
The coaches know their scouts there every game. So like that's the
Hmm.
first thought or like the first route that we're kind of introduced to, where yourself, it would be more the college. So it's always cool to
For
talk
sure.
about that. And, for yourself being 17, 18 years old, you'd already kind of burned a year or two of OHL like
Right.
season eligibility. So it
Yeah.
did make sense to
Right.
kind of pursue
Yeah, it
the
was.
college route.
I think it was like, when is the OHL draft? When you turn 16 or when you
Yeah,
turn
when you turn 16,
Okay, so
16.
it might have been after my U16 year that we had talked about this, and I was
Hmm.
like, uh, well, I don't know. But also too, I don't know if you guys do this in Canada, but we do these things in the U.S. So the U.S. is made up of, I think it's 12 districts. They group the states, or some states are by themselves and whatever, and you go to this little week long 5-day training camp with anyone basically who's from that district. And then they pick a team of, I think it's like 25 players or 24 players or something. And then you go to these national festivals. They start when you're 14 and they go 14, 15, 16. And usually the 16 one is like a really big deal, because then they start to kind of really handpick the players for the national development team program, and all that stuff. But at those festivals, they really kind of hammer home how, oh, college, oh, look at college. They I'll never forget this. They brought us all into the room, into like a big theater, and they had like a big presentation, and it's basically like, yeah, so everyone sitting in this room, about four of you or something like that are going to make it to the NHL. I'm like, oh, sick. Like, thanks for telling me that. It's like, I think we were 15 years old, and they're putting up a clip that's like, yeah, one in like 400 or something make the NHL. And I'm like, I don't think one in 400 was the number. I don't know. It was something crazy where you're just like, what? It was like, yeah, so like 1% of the players in this room are going to make the NHL. And I'm like, that's an awfully tough thing to be telling like 15, 16-year-old kids. But, they really do kind of push you to college. They kind of, I don't want to say they just make you aware that, oh, well, if you go to the CHL, you might not get education. And then
Mm-hmm.
what happens, you know? So I think you're right, absolutely correct. And it really does depend on where you grow up because typically around 15, 16 in the US, you can do college tours with your team. I mean, we went to, I don't even know how many schools. We went to Michigan, went to Michigan State, we went to Ohio State, we went to Notre Dame, all during just trips. You know, it was like the whole team went, we saw a game, we looked at the facility, got a little campus tour, you know, like so like I said, from the get-go, you're kind of just pushed toward college. You know, and everyone just kind of gives the CHL like, oh, don't say that too loud, you know. We don't want them to hear that. But like you said, I think it's really player dependent. I think if you've got the skills to be drafted in the first few rounds of the OHL draft and then hopefully the NHL draft or the CHL draft, whatever, WHL, QMJHL, you know, I think that potentially is a good place to go because you're going to get a pro life at 17 years old and it's going to prepare you for the pro life. Maybe not the pro game, but the pro life, you know, where you're kind of on your own, you know, you're at the rink most of the day, you've got ice when you want it, you know, you're traveling, you're playing games, not a ton of practice time. You know, the focus is hockey, whereas at college the focus is school. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's 1A 1B kind of thing. I mean, maybe that's a little dependent on where you go, but we can get into that later, I'm sure. But yeah, it's I think it really is dependent upon where you grow up and just how you feel. But I will say that there are a lot of Canadian kids who come to American colleges now. I think that's becoming more and more popular. Why, I don't know, but it seems as if it's a more popular route than it has been in the past. But
It's
I don't
definitely
know.
take. I think it's definitely taken off. But like from my experience, like obviously I went the college route, but I know guys who went
Right.
the OHL route, and like I grew up idolizing the OHL, so I always like was kind of jealous of them. But at the same time, like they hear stories about like the college atmosphere, the campus life, obviously
Mm-hmm.
the party scene too, like and just kind of
Yeah.
the so
Right.
they're like kind of jealous of that too because like a lot of these guys that go major junior, the major junior ends at 21 where like some people like you could be starting your NCAA career at 21 and then you're going
Right.
till 25. So it's kind of like, I think it's as you said, it depends on the person, but like kind of back to you there. So like you mentioned like you end up going the college route, you end up playing, but first you get drafted by Lincoln there in the
Yeah.
USHL, which is a great league, probably the best
Yeah.
junior league in the States for sure.
Mm-hmm.
You only play 1 year there for Lincoln, but I'm curious, like, when did all the NCAA interest like kind of start happening and like were you going on like you mentioned with your team there you guys were doing like little tours and stuff but like when it came to like official visits and stuff like how many schools did you end up going to see before you ended up making your decision?
Yeah, this is going to shock a lot of people, but I did one official visit, and that was to Canisius College, and that's where I ended up going,
And
which
they
is
got
kind
you.
of which is kind of crazy. But so yeah, so we'll back up a little bit. So my U16 year, we had a pretty good squad, and it's kind of started with Ohio State because at the time, Mark, my coach, Mark Fritchie, he was really close with Casey Jones, who worked at Ohio State, and oh, what's the other guy's name? He's the coach at Niagara now. Jason Lammers. You know, they were the coaches at assistant coaches kind of doing their recruiting and stuff. And oddly enough, Mark's other cousin or nephew, Tom Fritchie, Buzz, he kind of goes by who is Danny's younger brother, played at Ohio State. And Tom Goebel Jr., who also he's part of the Goebel family that founded the Barons youth program or whatever. He went to Ohio State and was at Ohio State at the time. So Ohio State kind of was like the first one that we all went to as a team because we would go down and play the Columbus Junior Blue Jackets as a weekend thing, and okay, hey, we'll play Saturday afternoon and go to the Ohio State game Saturday night, and ironically enough, this is a really ironic part, but the head coach at the time, John Markle, he was next door neighbors to my aunt and uncle. And I had no idea until, I don't know. It was long after the fact that I found out, maybe a couple of years after. But, um, and then my U18 season, it was just more of the same. We would go to, we would go play somewhere in Chicago, and on the way there, we would stop at Notre Dame. And we had some guys on our team that were going to some Catholic high schools in the area in Cleveland, and um, they needed like college visits and stuff, and they could get like credit or something. I don't know, but they kind of like asked, "Hey, can we stop at Notre Dame?" Or, "Hey, can we stop at Michigan State?" And so that kind of was like how it kind of got set up. But I think just being in the area, and I think Mark's connections kind of helped facilitate these unofficial visits where you're just kind of going with the team, hanging around and stuff. But for me personally, I think the interest kind of sparked, yeah, when I after my U16 year, I had played with the 91 guys all the way up, basically from we were 10 till 18. And um, my first year U18, we had some pretty good players on our team from the year before. So some kids who were born in the 90 birth year and the 91, we had a pretty good mix. We didn't really do that great, but we had a lot of guys move on. A lot of guys that were, I think we had 4 guys drafted in the futures draft of the USHL that year, myself and 2 or 3 others. And then we had a guy who actually ended up going to play in the OHL. Ironically, I think he played in Mississauga. A couple guys went on to play college. But yeah, I would say it just kind of became just like a thing we did. And then even my second year U18, we still just kind of just visited schools. I don't really know specifically how it all got set up, but I know there were guys on the team that had asked, "Hey, I got to do this for school. You think we could visit the school while we're here?" And I think they would, maybe the parents kind of push that a little bit as well. I'm not sure, but yeah. And then I went to Lincoln, and um, we weren't very good as a team. We had a lot of fun. We had a great group of guys. Like some guys have gone on to play, a handful of games and a few years in the NHL. But yeah, Lincoln was tough for me just because we just weren't good. We had good players, but we just didn't play well. I don't know. I don't know what it was, but um, I had quite a bit of interest from some big schools. I talked with Wisconsin, talked with Michigan State, talked to Ohio State, St. Cloud. Some pretty big time schools for myself. And I remember Canisius called me and sent me an email or something, and I was kind of like, Canisius, like, never heard of it. Where is this? And I looked it up and whatever, and you know, I enjoyed my time in Lincoln. I liked it, but I didn't play necessarily the best there. And the coach was kind of like, nobody really enjoyed the coach. I mean, he was a nice guy. I think when you put losing a lot of games and having a team with some older guys that are, salty dogs for lack of a better term, they've been around the league. They're kind of like, oh, is this it for me? I want to go somewhere. And they're not necessarily playing as well as they'd like or whatever. I think either way, the coach got fired and they brought in a different coach for the next year. And a lot of the guys ended up going back and they had a pretty good year the next year. They made the playoffs and I think lost in like the first or second round. But um, I remember sitting at home and I'm thinking like, okay, they want me back. I can go back, but I don't know if I want to keep playing for this coach because nobody seemed to really like him. At the time he was going back and you know I didn't know what to do really. I was kind of like, well, what do I say? He didn't tell me that any of these teams were looking for me or wanting to talk to me. And then all of a sudden I picked up the phone and called him and I said, "Hey, like, I think I'm not going to come back to Lincoln. I'm going to commit to Canisius College. And he was like blown away. I'm like, and I'm sitting there like, well, what are you so shocked about? We had a meeting at the end of the season. You wanted me back. I said, yeah, that's okay. I'm talking to some schools. And that was his chance to tell me all the schools that had called him about me. But he didn't say anything until after I told him I was thinking about or pretty much committing to Canisius. And he's like, oh, well, was it only a verbal? And I was like, yeah, I didn't sign anything. He's like, oh, okay, well, and then he named off, some other schools that were interested. And I'm like, why didn't you tell me this during the season or at the end of the year when we had this meeting? Like, why did it take you so long? And it just kind of became like a loss of trust. I'm like, how can I go back and trust this guy when he doesn't tell me all these 4 or 5 schools that were interested in me? And I'm kind of like sitting there thinking like, why would I play for this guy if I can't trust him? Because that's your future. He's not just messing with that season. I mean, that could be, you could miss out on something simply because someone doesn't tell you, and you're just like, okay, well, at the end of the day, I had to do what was best for me. And I think my parents kind of pushed it a little bit. I'll never forget, I went on that official meeting with my dad, and the head coach at the time, Dave Smith, looked me in the eyes, looked my dad in the eyes, and said, hey, your son's going to come here and he's going to play from day one. And I did that. Absolutely. I missed, I think, 3 or 4 games in my college career, and a couple of them were for injury. I think I was healthy scratched maybe 2 or 3 times in 4 years. And that was a big thing for my parents. And Canisius being a pretty well known school for business, um, also was like a big thing for my parents. And the more my parents talked about it, and I talked about it, it kind of just made sense. But do I wish I would have maybe gone back to junior and maybe explored those other options? Yeah, but then at the same time, I really wonder if I would be in the position I am today. I'm going on 10 years pro, and I don't think it would be the same. I think it would be completely different. So I would not have met my wife. So, you know, uh, Canisius turned out to be a great decision. It's just at that time you're thinking, okay, I got Wisconsin. I even talked a little bit with Colorado College, but again, you have to differentiate between just talking and who's going to make an offer, which is like the hardest thing. And it wasn't until I had that call with my junior coach that I had found out that some of the teams that I was talking to were ready to make an offer, and then to maybe make that offer better if I have a better season in Lincoln. And I'm kind of like, well, why the hell wouldn't you tell me this during these end of the season meetings or at the end of the year? I mean, we were out of the playoffs by like, I don't know, probably January. It's like, why wouldn't you let me know? Because plenty of other guys were leaving for official visits to, all over. And I, I never knew unless the recruit, a coach or assistant coach called me directly. I never really knew. And that was the thing with Canisius. They called me directly. I don't think they ever spoke to my junior coaches. I mean, they might have. I don't know if they ever did, but I always talked with them and whatnot. But yeah, so I know that was kind of long, a little bit rambling, but yeah, that's kind of how I ended up at Canisius. Who knows? I had some other friends that they maybe looked away from teams in the Atlantic Hockey Division, like the RITs, Mercyhurst, Niagaras, and stuff, and decided to go to a bigger school for for less scholarship or whatever it may be, or didn't turn out as well as they thought it would. And I feel bad for them, but at the same time, it kind of makes me validate, okay, hey, that was a good decision. And yeah, I mean, I played, I think, 130 college games, so that's a lot for a college player. So yeah, I mean, I'm definitely happy with how it turned out, but um, you know, maybe if I could go back and do it all over again, I might go back to Lincoln just to see what would happen, but I don't know. I don't regret it. That's for sure. It's gotten me where I am today. And yeah, I'm really thankful for that time at Canisius. It was hard, but it was fun for sure.
I tell everyone who ends up going to school, it's like kind of what you just mentioned with, friends and stuff. Like at the end of the day, it needs to be the right fit for you in terms of whether it's, if the schooling part's important to you, if it's the playing part, maybe it's being close to home, like whatever. It just needs to be the right fit for you because, as you mentioned, like you went to an Atlantic Division school and, some of your friends were like, no, I'm going to go to a bigger school. And then it didn't turn
Mm-hmm.
out well for them. And someone like yourself that played every game, as you said, but three or four, that's at the end of the day the bigger picture, and like you
Right.
kind of realizing that at that age and just being excited to go there is obviously kind of shows your character, especially, as I said, at whatever it is, 19, 18, 19
Yeah.
years old. And you end up having, like, man, like you had a good college career, like let's
Yeah.
just call it what it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
You ended up, you were leading scorer of your team 3 of the 4 years there. Um, you guys won a championship in 2012, 2013. You were on the low senior class All American first team in 13, 14.
Yeah.
And also, just to throw it out there, give that my hometown a little shout out. You played with a couple Burlington beauties.
Oh yeah. I played with a bunch of
Um,
Burlington boys. Yeah, for sure.
yeah, like again, just kind of over the border. So like obviously the
Yeah.
Conacher brothers, I
Yeah.
spent years training with them, and then also Tyler
Okay.
Wiseman, who I
Yeah.
also trained with for years. So in
Oh,
the end,
nice.
man, it looked like a good fit for you.
Yeah, it certainly turned out to be one. I have to give some credit to my dad. When I was growing up, my brother played hockey as well. So, and a lot of times, the parents are in, split directions. I'm going with my mom, my dad's going with my brother. So I never had like a ton of trips with my dad because he was with my brother a lot. I mean, we had some trips, but not nearly as many as with my mom. And he was the one that came with me on the official visit, and I think he was the one that really kind of said, hey, you got to look at the bigger picture here. It's not just about next year. This is about your life. Like, this is a life decision. And I think he really kind of made me understand that, hey, you're going to get a full scholarship and you're going to play from day one. And it certainly worked out for me. And also got to give some credit to Dave Smith and BJ Adams. They're the two guys that Dave Smith was a head coach and BJ Adams was the assistant. He kind of recruited me pretty hard. I was their first USHL commit. They had a guy there before. His name was Eric Rex, who played in the USHL, but I was the first guy they had who was from the USHL, played in the USHL. So it was kind of a big deal for them to bring me in. That was like their first kind of, I hate to say this. I don't know, high profile recruit, I suppose. I mean, I don't know how else to describe it, but they told me I was going to play from day one, and they let me play. And my freshman year, I got to play with Corey. Corey's a hell of a player. I've never seen a player who of that size play like such a pit bull. And man, did he he made it easy for me. I was a little intimidated playing with him and the other another senior. His name was Vinny Scarcella. They were, I think Corey led the NCAA in scoring his junior year. I don't know, something. He was, yeah, way up there, and Vinny was not far behind. So it was a little intimidating to be put on a line with those two guys as a freshman. Definitely got a few looks from some other guys in the team about that one, but I mean, it wasn't my choice. That was the coach's decision. But um, yeah, uh, it turned out to be a really great fit. But I think it was mostly had a lot to do with um, the two coaches there that trusted me, and obviously, I kind of gave them the reasons to play me. I was playing well, and I think them putting me on a line with Corey and Vinny really helped my confidence as a freshman. Kind of gave me a little boost to say, hey, you belong here, you can play here, you can produce here, and you know, obviously it turned out that way. I think I'm still up there in some of the offensive categories all time. Well, for the Division 1 part, Canisius was a D3 school before, I think. So there were some guys that had some pretty gaudy numbers, but from the D1 side, I think I'm still holding up on some of the goals and assists and points and stuff like that. So that's kind of cool to be able to say that you're up that high. But playing with some guys like that my freshman year, I really helped me for sure. And then yeah, it just turned out to be good. I mean, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows though. My first year, like you said before, it was a little bit hard for me to fit in. I had a hard time integrating into college life. I wasn't the 21-year-old freshman. I actually think I was one of two kids in my class who weren't turning 21 their freshman year or weren't already 21 when they came in. So, being younger and then on a little bit of an older team was tough. I definitely had a little bit of rocky road to the point where I almost transferred out of Canisius, but I'm glad I stuck with it. And, I really have Dave Smith to thank for that. He really helped me, gave me some opportunities and, um, you know, set me up to succeed. And that's what he told me in my recruiting meeting. And, he definitely delivered on that for sure. And I know there were some guys in the team that don't have the best uh, relationship with him or had the best relationship with him. But again, I think it's all personal. My relationship with him is good. What it still is good. Was good. Haven't really talked to him since he left Canisius, or since I left Canisius. But um, he really, him and BJ Adams, I think, were two guys that obviously being the coach and the assistant coach, they really gave me the tools to succeed. And and then also too, we ended up committing a childhood friend of mine as well. His name's Cody Freeman. Um, you might know him. He's from around the Toronto area.
I
Played,
just I just know the name, like I don't know him
yeah,
personally.
yeah. But so we grew up. I played summer hockey in Pittsburgh. His dad was a coach. We played the prospect tournaments and whatever, and so it was kind of cool that he ended up coming. And we got to play together my junior and senior year. And, I played with another guy, my roommate, Pat Sullivan. And, the three of us from my sophomore year to my senior year, just, I don't know what it was. It just clicked. And, um, you know, my junior year when we won it, we finally had, I think, the team that was, we had a couple freshmen, but the freshmen were good. But I think almost 90% of our team were juniors and sophomores, kids that had forced to play because my sophomore year, I think we only had three seniors. And, that senior class with Corey Conacher and those guys had, I think, like 8 or 9 players. So we lost like a lot of people. And, we definitely struggled my sophomore year, but you could tell, hey, this is, you know, something's in the works here because we weren't that bad as a mainly underclassmen team. We were holding our own. So you give all those guys experience as freshmen. Oh, by the time they're juniors, they're going to be really good players. So, we ended up winning the league my junior year, and then my senior year we lost in the finals. But yeah, I mean, they certainly build good teams, good players. And I think it's funny you say that because about the Burlington boys, they loved that OJHL league. I think we had, I want to say at one point our team was literally 50-50 Americans and Canadians. And I think of the Canadian guys, I think only 2 or 3 of them, maybe 4, weren't from like the Southern Ontario, maybe little Northern Ontario, like guys that played in that OJ league, with and yeah, I just thought it was kind of funny that you mentioned the Burlington boys because I think for a while there was like a pipeline. Just if you were from Burlington, Canisius was calling you, just because of the Conikers and the Wisemans. But they're good players, man. They still are. I mean, Corey is still playing in the AHL. I think he's had a hell of a career in Europe as well. I think he's the first NHL alum that Canisius has had, and he's certainly a cornerstone of the program. Probably, and rightfully so. He's probably the best player to go through there. There's been some other guys in the recent history. Dylan McLaughlin's one of them. Ryan Schmelzer's another guy that have done well at the AHL level. And I would assume probably maybe one day come to Europe. I don't know, but
Pretty sure Schmelzer's married to Conacher's sister,
yeah,
is he not? So
I think you're right. He
another
actually is.
Burlington connection.
Yeah, I think you're right, actually. Yeah. And yeah, it's unfortunate what happened to Shane, but I'm happy that he's just healthy and
Yeah.
enjoying life. But to go through that and to come out on the other side and um, you know to fight that battle, that's extraordinary, and it kind of puts hockey in perspective. It's not always all about the next goal or the next shift. It's sometimes your life's more important, and
Mhm.
I'm glad he was able to fight through what he had and whatnot. But
Well, back
yeah,
back to your point, like just sorry to like to talk about the Burlington connection. Like I think like Corey kind of like was the first guy to do it. And then like as you would know, like the Canisius is the Niagara's where I went.
yeah,
Like they have to get guys early because if other teams, the higher programs or whatever, get them on their radar, then they know like, there's a good chance that if somebody's choosing between Canisius, Niagara, and RPI, they're gonna go RPI or Michigan.
right,
So they
yeah,
they have to commit guys early. And I think like, Buffalo not being as far from Burlington, Lewiston, New York, where Niagara is not being that far from Burlington, it's an hour. Like that's kind of the a selling point, being like, yeah, we're just over the border. So like if you ever want to go home, like you can, blah blah. So it's
oh, for sure, for sure. We had a lot of guys do that actually, that exact thing. I think um, those guys were going home every weekend. I don't blame them. I mean, Buffalo was 3 hours for me from Cleveland, so it's a little like I don't know if I want to do the drive. I didn't really go home that much. I mean, my parents came to almost every home game, so but they enjoyed driving. So I personally don't enjoy driving. If I could fly somewhere, I'm getting on a plane 10 out of 10
it's a
times.
lot of
But
gas money too for your parents.
yeah, for sure. But yeah, it's funny. One of the guys, a goalie in our class, Tony Capobianco, real obviously Italian kid. He would go home on like a Sunday night and come back with just like a whole bag full of food, and he would just have it for the week. And his grandma, the typical stereotypical like Italian, just bringing back like veal parm and sauce and all this stuff for him and his roommate. It was pretty funny. He would literally come back with like a a huge grocery bag full of food. And but yeah, I mean, it makes sense because Niagara had a lot of guys from that league as well.
Mhm.
I think the only team that really didn't was like RPI or RIT and Mercyhurst. They seem to get more. RIT seemed to get more guys from Western Canada for whatever reason, and I think a lot more guys from the NA went to Mercyhurst. It seemed, but I mean, it's worked for Canisius. That's worked for Niagara. They've always had pretty good teams. I mean, obviously, you're bound to have a down year every now and then, just from the recruiting cycle and who comes and who goes. But yeah, you're absolutely right. That is a huge selling point, being close to home. Uh, some guys like it, some guys don't, but I would think for Canadians, being able to go to school and it only be, I don't know, what is that drive? Less than an hour?
Niagara was an hour, and I will like
Yeah,
kind of like you, like when you look back on your career, it's easy to do it now. Like I wouldn't change anything if I didn't go my route was. I wouldn't have met my wife in Germany, kind of thing, kind of like you with
right.
meeting your wife at school. Like,
Yeah,
um, but at the same time, I'm like, if I'd played another year junior and I didn't like have so much emphasis on being so close to home, like committed to Niagara early, like
yeah,
what would have happened, kind of thing.
right.
Because like,
Yeah,
Niagara didn't I didn't really get the college experience because of there was one bar. Like, as I said, I was going home every weekend. Like,
Yeah.
it's not
Yeah.
like Oswego was way different.
Yeah.
I'm so happy I
Right. Right.
transferred. But I want to ask you too, like when you end up graduating from Canisius there, like continuing with your hockey career, how like the next 2 years you basically do the stereotypical like undrafted ECHL grind. Like, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And
Yeah.
that's
Yeah. It's a
I'm just
tough
curious
life,
how was
man.
like, like let's talk about that. Like how was that for you?
Yeah.
Because obviously it's you're battling with teams that have affiliations of guys who are under
Hmm.
contract, whether they were drafted or not. And then also like,
Yeah.
coming from maybe a lower ranked school of
Right.
D1 just
Right.
because of its division. Like, how
Yeah.
was that kind of grind for you there for those 2 years?
Yeah. So I remember like my junior year, toward the end of the year, our coach kind of brought me and a couple other guys in to the, office there and just said, "Hey, you know, I want to let you guys know, give you some confidence. Some teams are calling about you. NHL teams, AHL teams, they're interested. So keep doing what you're doing, kind of thing, just to, letting us know, hey, here's some positive stuff. Maybe, use it." Okay. So I think that year I went to a development camp, another kid went to a development camp, and I was, a little bit like starstruck when I went, I guess you could say. Maybe not starstruck, but just maybe felt a little bit in over my head the first day. And as it went on, I felt more and more comfortable. And I remember, talking with them in my exit meeting saying, "Hey, we're going to keep an eye on you. Our AHL GM is going to be at some games, whatever." I'm like, "All right, great. This is perfect." Like, and the whole time I'm just like playing, I'm doing okay. I didn't have quite the numbers I had my junior year, but still I think I had like 38 points or something, like 17 or 15 goals, which I thought was like pretty good. And so fast forward to the end of the season, I'm thinking, hey, all right, this team's gonna maybe call me. And I didn't hear a word from them. And maybe I didn't play well enough, I don't know. But so I ended up going to Toledo, and Toledo at the time was, only 90 minutes from Cleveland. So I was like, yeah, all right, sick. I had a couple other, I think Elmira was the other one. They wanted me and another guy, Taylor Law, who you probably played against and know. Um, he ended up going to Elmira, but I think they wanted three of us. And the one kid actually, I think he signed, and then um, the Monarchs in the AHL called him and was like, "Hey, you want to come here instead?" And he was like, "Yeah, for sure." So he actually never even went to Elmira. He went right to New Hampshire, I think there. Yeah, New Hampshire. And so yeah, I went to Toledo, and I don't know, man. I just couldn't figure it out. I played 10 games. I had 3 assists in 10 games. I'll never forget it, because I was like talking with my agent at the time, and he's like, "Yeah, I called those teams, and they're not looking for forwards. They don't really seem too interested." And I'm like, "Ah, shit." And I'm like, "Well, maybe next year, maybe in the summer, And then in the summer it was like, yeah, no chance, no chance. I'm like, okay, like, all right, it was a fun experience. But maybe, I didn't play well. Maybe I didn't have the season they thought I was going to have, whatever. It was fun. I was like, okay. Um, but I remember him saying, "Hey, if you go to the coast, it's kind of like, hey, if you do really good, we can get that two-way AHL coast deal, or maybe just a straight AHL deal." I was like, all right, and but for whatever reason, I couldn't figure it out. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was just, not being comfortable. I don't know. I have no idea. Um, just didn't, it wasn't, had nothing to do with the other guys that were there. I mean, we had some good players, and but 10 games, only 3 assists for a guy who's a point player, a top six type of role, to go there and only have 3 points was tough. So then in the summer, you're looking around, okay, who do I sign with? Who do I sign with? Whatever. And I signed with Idaho in the summer, which, looking back, probably wasn't the best idea, because at the time that's all the guys who had, a lot of experience, or, really good play. They wanted to be out west because, you flew everywhere. That's when Alaska was in a league, and whatnot. So the travel was, I think, the only time Idaho took a bus from what I remember, was to Utah. I played the Utah Grizzlies. Everywhere else they had to fly because it was so far. And I get to camp, and guys start coming down, and then you start to be like, okay, where do I fit in? Where do I fit in? And I just looked around, and I'm like, okay, well, this guy's got 100 A games. This guy's been here for 10 years. This guy's been here for 5 years. You look around and you're like, suddenly you're like, okay, well, there's really no spot for me here. And then, that Monday before the season comes, when everyone has to get down, and, you get called and you say, hey, we got to let you go. Okay. So I go home and back to Cleveland, kind of like, still like, what the hell just happened? I don't really know. And then I get called to Indy, and the same kind of thing happens. I go there. They're like, hey, we need a guy who can be a top 6 player, and that was always my role. And again, did a little bit better there, but still, just I don't know what it was. I just had a hard time in the coast. I don't know if it was because the contract's kind of like guaranteed for 2 weeks, and then it's like you can be out on your own if you're not doing well. Maybe it was the revolving door that kind of always was in the back of my mind, which probably was the case. But at the end of the day, you still have to go and play. And it wasn't like I played bad. I just didn't really deliver that role that they were looking for, I suppose. Um, and then quick little sidebar here. So I get called in, and they let me go in Indy. Indy's only like a few hours from Cleveland. So instead of waiting for waivers, I drive home, because no one really gets picked up on waivers in the coast. And like I said, Indy wasn't that far from Cleveland. So I drive home, and they play. And then I think on like Saturday morning or something. Yeah, I think it was like Saturday morning or maybe Friday night, like late Friday night, I get a call from the coach in Indy. And I'm like, what the hell does this guy want? I pick up the phone, and he goes, hey, can you be at the rink 9 a.m. practice Saturday? I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah, we had this guy get hurt, and this guy got called up. We need a guy. Can you be at the rink for practice? We're going to sign you again. I'm like, no. He's like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, I drove home already. Like, it's Saturday. You cut me on Wednesday. So the waiver period's passed, right? Obviously. So I'm like, okay, whatever. But that didn't matter. I know. But I was like, you just cut me 3 days ago. And now when you need a guy and you're like in trouble necessary, or like you need help, now you come to me. But when I needed help, you let me go. So I'm like, why would I continue this carousel of like, it's just not a good place to be mentally, where you're continuously having to like, you know, bend the knee in front of management to be like, oh, please give me another chance. It's like, no, I want to go somewhere because you want me there, not because you lost a player to a call up and a guy's injured and you know what I mean? And I understand it's an opportunity, but I'm like, you just cut me literally 72 hours ago, and now you're begging to have me back because you need to fill a spot. Like, so I just kind of like, I wasn't really into it. And I said, no, like, I'm sorry, I'm not going to come. And then Wichita called me and said, hey, come here, come play here. I was like, okay. So I get on a plane, I go to Wichita, and I play for a guy by the name of Kevin McClellan. He was on all those great Oiler teams with Semenko and Gretzky and all those guys. And I remember walking in on the first day, and the trainer, hell yeah, here's your spot in the stall, whatever. I'm like, okay, thanks, man. Like, sounds good. And guys are just in the room having coffee. And I remember being like, where's the coach? Like, what's going on? And like, he's in like street clothes, kind of like a sweatsuit kind of thing, just in one of the empty stalls in the locker room, just with a coffee, just shooting the shit, and with the boys laughing. And I'm like, and they're like, oh yeah, that's the coach there. I'm like, what? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then for the next probably like 2.5 months, I probably had the best time I've ever had in the coast playing in Wichita, because I played for a coach that was like, he just wanted to be, you could tell he missed the atmosphere of being in the locker room, being around the guys. I mean, just would absolutely just give it to some guys on our team just in a fun way, like as if he was a player. And it kind of made me enjoy hockey again because when you get, you're getting called in saying, hey, we got to let you go. We got to let you go. And you're just like, you're not sure how much more you can take mentally,
Yeah,
right? And
here we go again.
yeah. And so I ended up, I think I played like 20 games in Wichita. Again, not great numbers. Um, but I remember I scored my first pro goal there. We were in Brampton, scored my first pro goal, and all that stuff. So I have some nice memories there. A lot of good guys, like great guys that I think they could tell maybe I was a little nervous or something. Again, I couldn't point out one specific thing as to why I struggled in the coast, but I definitely rode the coast carousel to the point where I'm like, I'm ready to get off this dang thing, like this is too much. And same thing happened in Wichita. I got way more of an opportunity in Wichita than I did anywhere else. I think if I was in Toledo longer, I would have had more of an opportunity, but there was only, I think, 10 or 12 games left in the season when I got there. So, I had the opportunity there as well. But I think Wichita was the one that really gave me the biggest opportunity. And yeah, for whatever reason, I don't know, man. I couldn't get it together. I don't know what it was. Um, and, I think it might have had something to do with, I've always just kind of been an offensive guy. I've always played with, guys that can kind of maybe cover up some mistakes of mine in our own end. And, I think in the coast, it can be a little bit every man for themselves because guys want to get called up. And hey, I fully understand that. Why wouldn't you? I couldn't imagine being a guy on an NHL contract playing in the East Coast League. That's probably the last place you want to be. So, I can understand that. But yeah, for me, I don't know. Part of me is like, I want to go back home and try and prove that I could do it. But I'm like, why? What's the point? And so I ended up getting cut from Wichita again, or from Wichita. And and then I came overseas. I played in the UK league for like 2 months, which was a lot of fun. Um, and then in the summer, I signed with Atlanta. Another friend of mine had played there. He was going back, so I was like, all right, it will be fun. And I'll never forget this. I get called in, and the coach sits me down, and he goes, "You had a great camp. You did everything we asked of you. Couldn't have asked you to do anything more, but we have to let you go." And I just remember being like, wait, what? Like, did you, like, I was just putting a pretzel. I'm like, well, so what do you mean? Like, we have to let you go. And I'm like, why? You just told me. And this was like the first time that I kind of was like, all right, I'm going to stick up for myself in this meeting. Like before, I was always just kind of like, yep, okay, all right, yep, yep. Like you just go along with what they're saying and you leave. And this time I kind of like, in a way, fought for myself a little bit. I was kind of like, well, why are you letting me go if you just told me I did everything I could? Like, and he was just like, yeah. And then it came out. He's like, yeah, well, we got a guy from Providence coming down who is going to be in your spot. And I'm like, okay, so why can't I play on the third line and be secondary scoring? Like, what? I don't understand. Like, I don't understand. Like, you're just going to have the top six guys score, and the third line's just going to be like a grind line that you don't expect any kind of offense from. Like, it didn't make sense. And he was just kind of like, yeah, well, this is our decision. It's what we have to do. It's not easy. We'll help you get somewhere else. And I'm like, just thinking to myself, I'm like, man, are you really going to help me? Like, I don't really think you're going to help me, like, and I just was like, all right, whatever. I've said my piece. And I was like, okay, I'm out of here. And I was on the way home from camp driving back to Cleveland, and my agent called me and he was like, hey, like, what happened? And I told him everything that happened in the meeting. And he's like, all right, let me call you back. And he calls the coach, and I don't know what they talked about. And then he called me back and he was like, yeah, this one's tough. And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, I don't know what to do. And he's like, well, what do you do now? And he was kind of pushing me like, yeah, we'll hang out there and do this and this. And I just was like, I'm like, no, man, I need to go home. Like, I need to figure out if this is what I want to do. This is now the fifth coast team, I think. Yeah, fourth or fifth coast team that has basically said, okay, you're good enough to play, but we're not going to keep you. And I'm like, okay. And I think for me, I just needed maybe a coach in the coast to just say, okay, I see this kid. He's got potential. He can do this, but he needs time. He needs to figure it out on his own. Let me just play him and give him 30, 40 games. That's a lot of games, I know, but give him, some time to figure it out in a position that he's used to being in a top six, power play kind of guy. Like, that's a lot to ask. I understand that, but maybe if I had a coach that kind of gave me that opportunity, I might have um, done better. I mean, I had a little bit of that in Wichita, but again, most of that was, third line, a little bit of power play, not a lot. And, I think the coaches of the coast is a very situational based league. If you're in a good situation, I think you'll do really well. Because there are guys that I played with and against in college where I'm like, okay, this guy's not very good, but they go to the coast and they light it up. And I'm like, oh, that's okay, like good for him. But it makes you think like, well, what did he do differently that I didn't do? And so I just remember being like, I think I'm gonna quit hockey. Like I think I'm done. And I remember being at home for a good month, maybe 2, 3 weeks, maybe, and just being like, yeah, I don't know. I think I'm done. Like this isn't for me. And then I get a call from some buddies of mine, um, who I played with in Dundee, that they had never played. A couple Canadian guys, they had never played in the U.S. before, so they were down in the SP in the SPHL in Fayetteville, and they were like, "Oh, come down, it'll be fun. Come down. We'll have fun. We'll have fun." And I'm like, and my perception of the SPHL at the time was just not good. Like it's a fighters league. I'm like I'm the furthest thing from a fighter. Like my gloves are like sewn on kind of thing, Like I'm not dropping them for anything really, But they convinced me to come down there, and I had the best time of my career for sure at the time, and that kind of reinvigorated me, and um, yeah, it led me to Europe, which obviously I kind of took their word to say, okay, like let me just go have fun, see what happens, and turned out to be, yeah, my best North American season that I had, and yeah, we had a great time there. Team was really good. I think we played so much golf. We had 2 free golf courses we could play at. Uh, yeah, we all lived in like one big apartment complex. It was pretty nice. Um, yeah, it kind of gave me that energy again to play and to have fun playing and to realize like, oh, you can do it. You can do this. And I remember I turned down a lot of East Coast calls just because I was like, I don't want to live that again. I don't want to go through that. I don't want someone to tell me good, but there's a time on this. You're here until this guy comes back, or you're here until this guy comes down, being a call up. And I was just kind of like, I don't want to do that. I'd rather stay here and just continue having fun and continue to build on what I had built. And yeah, so that kind of made me want to play hockey again, I guess, is how I would frame it. And then yeah, then I've been in Europe ever since. So
Well, I
I know
wanted to
that's
bring
kind
it
of
up.
long-winded, but I'm a little bit long. I'm a little bit long-winded. Sorry.
No, it's all good. One thing I wanted to talk about was like I was in Fayetteville actually the next year, for 2 weeks. So
Okay.
and I was gonna say,
Oh,
you played with a Sligo alumni, a guy I played with, Nick Rivet. Um,
yeah, yeah, ribs.
yeah, so obviously that then I was kind of like he kind of got me there too, but it was kind of like what you said, like I like similarly the next year couldn't find a job and was I had been on the Europe trek and I kind of went through a similar thing where the coast like just with goalie numbers never got a chance and I had the same
Yeah.
opinion of the SPHL, and like one of my best friends got traded to Fayetteville when I was kind of a free agent. And they were like looking, and I was like, at that point, I was like, you know what, screw it, I'll go there. I'll finish the year, like have fun, and then I'll go back to like France or something. And kind of like what you mentioned about it reinvigorating yourself for the game, like your love
Yeah.
of the game. Like
Yeah.
I went there for 2 weekends, literally. I played 3 of the 4 games. I was really good, and I ended up getting a call from the Dell 2 randomly. And I always think back, if I hadn't gone and played those games, if I was just sitting at home, maybe that doesn't happen. So,
Yeah.
um,
100%.
the SP, obviously, it's not the best league, but at the same time, it's still a fun league. There's
Yeah. Yeah.
competitive people in it. You're treated amazing by
Hmm.
lots of booster clubs and stuff. Fayetteville, like, the apartment complexes you were talking about were very
Yeah.
nice, good
Yeah.
area.
And I think
Um,
they like those teams too, like they live and die on the benefits too, right? Like
yeah.
it's all benefit based. Like I don't like, I don't think I paid for lunch for an entire season in Fayetteville. Like we just had so many like free lunch coupons. Like I'm sure you had the Fazoli's coupons,
Yeah,
just
yeah,
like
yeah.
a stack like this high, just whenever you want. I mean, Fazoli's is like, I mean, it's not the best food, but like it's free. So you're like, screw it, I'll go, and
Everything
yeah,
in
it's
that
like,
league's about saving money. Like you don't care
yeah, it
about
really
diet
is.
anymore.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, I could go eat this
Yeah.
sub place for the seventh time this week, sure, because
Yeah.
it's free or
Yeah.
I get 50% off.
Right, right. That's so true. But it's kind of funny too how they do stuff there. Like I know there's a lot of teams that kind of do a lot of stuff under the table, but I remember I don't think was Jeff Best wasn't the coach when you were there, was
He
he?
was.
He was. I mean, I loved Besser. I thought he was hilarious. He would just be on the bench, like just chirping to himself the whole game, and like he was like a stud in the CHL, and I think he was just one of those coaches where like he couldn't like figure out why you couldn't do something because he could do it, and
Yeah.
he didn't know how to like really like relay how to do something or like where to be kind of thing. He's just like, I don't know, just do it. It's like I'm like, Fester, like you need to tell these guys like what to do. They don't know, like they don't have it in them. But yeah, he was funny, man. Like I know some guys kind of like when I was there, they kind of didn't have the greatest opinion of him and stuff. But man, I thought he was hilarious. And there were times where he would call me and he was like, hey, you have a good weekend there. There might be a little something in your paycheck. I'm like, okay. Like, I'm like, what the hell does that mean? Like, I don't know. Like, and I'm thinking, I'm like, oh man, maybe I'll get like a Jimmy John's coupon or like a free Chipotle or something. Like, who knows, And then every now and then there would be some other incentives just to have a good weekend here. Here's a little extra for you, or and I know a lot of some other guys would have that, and but yeah, Rivs he was a good dude, man. He still is, I'm sure, a great guy, but I haven't really talked with anyone from there kind of maybe since maybe 2 or 3 years after I just friends on social media and stuff, but haven't really chatted with a lot of them. But
Yeah.
he was fun. Definitely one of those D men that was like I liked being on the ice with him because he would, if somebody came near me, he was always, you know, a willing combatant if it needed to be. And there
He
were
was
some other
perfect for
guys
that
too.
league, I felt. Like he could
Yeah,
play good defensively, like, make a good first pass. But then as you said, like that league obviously does have some guys who like are trying to get up to the coast and like they want to fight their
yeah,
way up and
right.
Riv could throw them too. So it
Yeah,
was
dude. Him. I mean, we had like a guy who was like
you had Drobot, right?
robot who was like
Yeah.
the fighter. I'm sure. And this guy was like, man, he was like, I mean, he's a beast. Like, I'm like, I would be, just he was an animal. And there were some other guys like Rivs would fight quite a bit. This other guy, Brad Plumpton, he would fight quite a bit. And this other kid, Graham Strukoff, and those four guys were kind of like, the guys that were willing to go. But you know, Riv was more than just a fighter though. Like
Hmm.
some of the guys, like it couldn't really. It's kind of like the best part of their game. Like they were just physical, could do the pass, but maybe they weren't the best skaters or. But I thought Riv he could do more than what he did when I was there. I thought I don't
Hmm.
know what happened after I left, if he did more his second year, but you could see that there was more to his game than just being hard to play against and hard nosed and stuff. But I think some guys, to get in and keep their
Yeah.
spot, you start doing more little things like, okay, like I'm willing to fight, or I'm willing to just do this, which is, guys make NHL careers out of that. So it obviously works. And, um, he was always a guy that I thought could do more than what he did, or could be given more of a chance than what he got when he
Mm-hmm.
was there. At least when I was there, I don't know. Again, I'm not sure what happened after I left, but um, yeah, it was. We had some good times too there. We had some good players. I mean, we certainly had a few forwards that probably could have got called up whenever they wanted. They just didn't go, or remember there was one guy there, Josh McQuaid, who was an older guy. I think he has like some franchise games played there or something. I don't
Yeah.
know. He's pretty far up there, but I mean, he could have played in the coast for sure. I don't think he really cared about it, I guess. But
No, it's
yeah,
an interesting league, but
yeah, definitely interesting. I mean, I would say when I went in, I was expecting there to be like a rodeo. There's just 2, 3, 4 fights a game, and it
slap
really
shot just
wasn't. Yeah, it really wasn't like that. It was kind of like the guy. Every team had a guy like Drobot too. They all
yeah.
had their guy, and as long as no one went off the rails, it was relatively quiet, and the skill guys more or less could play their game, and you know unless one of them, I'll never forget, Drobes came up to me. I kind of was like chirping with a guy, slashing him or something, and he goes, "Hey, you know, I don't want to fight this guy right now because my hand hurts from like 2 games ago. So can you like chill?" And I was like, "Oh shit, yeah, sorry, man." Like I didn't know. Like that was like the first time I'd really played with a guy who was like on the team, kind of like as his main role was to like enforcer, I
Yeah.
suppose. And it was just kind of funny. I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah, sure." And then he was just like, "Yeah, like just chill a little." And I was like,
I'll get
"Okay."
him eventually. Don't worry. Just give me some time.
Yeah. He's like, just relax. I was like, "Okay." And then yeah, I just kind of was like, man, I have the utmost respect for guys that do that and are willing to do that. And because it's not easy, it's not hard mentally, physically. It's a hard place. It's a hard thing to do, and you know you got to respect those guys, because if you give them respect, they give you so much in return. And those are the guys that really help you, give you space on the ice to do your thing and have fun.
100%. Not a way that I would endorse making a living, but everyone's got their role, as you said. But
Yeah.
man, it's kind of funny. So I've never had this happen before in the podcast, but we've been like buzzing for so long that we haven't even got to Europe yet. And I feel like if we
Oh
keep going, it's
yeah.
gonna be like 3 hours. So I
Yeah,
thought,
it might be.
and I
Yeah,
just saw
I
your
could
wife kind of walk in
pop
behind
in. Oh
quickly and then
yeah,
close the door
sorry.
with the baby. So
Yeah, no worries.
we should definitely do. I think what we'll do is we'll call it here and we'll do a part two. So like maybe next
Okay.
week we'll record the part two and then we can get into you going to Europe because as you said, after this year in Fayetteville, you end up heading over and there's still so much to
Yeah,
talk
yeah,
about. So
yeah.
I
Sorry,
think that's probably the safe
yeah,
bet.
yeah. You're probably right. And like I said, I'm pretty long-winded. I know there were some times where I was probably talking for 5 minutes straight, but so sorry about that. Hopefully that people still listen and enjoy the little, I guess, tidbits of information. But yeah, for
No,
sure, I'm in to have a part two
yeah,
if
no,
and
this
when.
is the
And
first on this podcast where we've had to go into part two
uh,
because there's so much information. So good on you. And
all right, yeah,
I
sounds
know
good.
everyone enjoys the information, but yeah, so we're gonna call it here for those listening. When we get back next week here, we're gonna get into Europe because obviously there's still many years in Europe left to go over, kind
Yeah,
of where we
yeah.
met each other. And yeah, for those listening, I appreciate you guys sticking with us here, and we'll see you for part two next week. And until then, cheers and ciao.